The night over Normandy flickered with brief flashes and seemed endless. In the second row of a cramped plane sat a silent young officer. His name was Richard Winters, and within hours he would make decisions on which lives and the outcome of the landing depended. They said he did not shout, but acted, and that even in chaos men held their ground beside him. But few know what mistakes of others he had to correct, and what secret he would have carried with him if not for one discovery at an enemy position. In this story, there is almost forgotten correspondence. There are disputed orders. There is a winter when ammunition and hope ended at the same time. We will show how a quiet lieutenant made simple methods work where rigid schemes failed, and why his technique is now a textbook for officers around the world. And in the very end, you will find out what really happened in those moments when not only maps and artillery, but the reputation of a man who became a symbol of trust were at stake. Watch until the final moments to piece together the full puzzle of his choices. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Richard Davis Winters entered the world on January 21st, 1918, in the small farming community of New Holland, Pennsylvania. His parents, Richard and Edith Winters, raised their son with the simple values of their Mennonite heritage. Hard work, humility, and service to others weren't just ideals in the Winters household. They were a way of life. The boy who would one day lead paratroopers into battle grew up helping with farm chores, attending church regularly, and excelling in his studies. Those who knew young Dick Winters described him as thoughtful, reserved, and possessed of an unusual maturity for his age. He rarely sought attention, preferring to lead by example rather than words. At Franklin and Marshall College, Winters majored in economics while participating in athletics and the debate team. His professors remembered him as diligent and methodical, someone who approached problems systematically. These qualities would prove invaluable when faced with the chaos of combat. But in 1939, war seemed distant from the peaceful campus in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. Like millions of young Americans, Winters felt compelled to serve. However, his path to easy company began not with heroic ambitions, but with practical considerations. Faced with the draft, he chose to enlist and have some control over his military destiny. The quiet farm boy from Pennsylvania was about to embark on a journey that would test every principle his parents had instilled in him. Camp Toccoa, Georgia, in 1942, was where ordinary men were forged into elite paratroopers. The training was deliberately brutal, designed to weed out those who couldn't handle the physical and mental demands of airborne warfare. For Winters, who had been commissioned as a second lieutenant after officer candidate school, Toccoa represented his first real test of leadership. Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, was more than a military unit. It was becoming a brotherhood. Under the harsh training regimen implemented by Captain Herbert Sobel, the men of Easy Company were pushed to their limits. Sobel was a capable administrator, but lacked the combat instincts that would be essential in battle. His rigid, often petty approach to leadership created resentment among the men. It was in this environment that Winters' natural leadership abilities began to emerge. Unlike Sobel, who ruled through fear and regulations, Winters led through competence and genuine concern for his soldiers. He took time to know each man personally, understanding their strengths and weaknesses. When Sobel made decisions that seemed arbitrary or dangerous, Winters quietly found ways to protect his men while maintaining military discipline. The contrast became more apparent during advanced training at Camp McCall and Fort Bragg. While Sobel focused on military protocol, Winters concentrated on practical skills that would keep his men alive in combat. He studied tactics obsessively, always looking for better ways to accomplish missions with minimal casualties. His methodical approach earned respect not just from his men, but from other officers who recognized his potential. By the time Easy Company shipped out to England in 1943, the internal dynamics were clear. Sobel commanded on paper, but the men increasingly looked to Winters for real leadership. This tension would eventually result in Sobel's transfer, but not before teaching Winters valuable lessons about the difference between authority and leadership. The night jump into Normandy scattered Easy Company across the French countryside like seeds in the wind. Winters landed alone in a field, temporarily separated from his men and his mission. In the pre-dawn darkness, he could hear distant gunfire and the occasional burst of a machine gun. Somewhere out there, his soldiers were fighting for their lives. Using his compass and map, Winters began moving toward the company's designated rally point. Along the way, he gathered scattered paratroopers from various units, forming an impromptu fighting force. This ability to adapt and reorganize under pressure would become a hallmark of his leadership style. Rather than panic about the disrupted plans, he focused on what could be accomplished with available resources. By dawn, Winters had assembled enough men to receive one of the most critical missions of D-Day. German artillery positioned at Brecourt Manor was devastating the American forces landing at Utah Beach. The 4 German 105mm artillery pieces threatened to turn the beach into a killing field, potentially dooming the entire invasion. The mission was straightforward, but deadly: neutralize the guns and eliminate the threat. Winters devised a simple but direct strategy following the principle of fire and maneuver. He would attack the first gun by laying down machine gun fire while his assault force made its way across an open field. What followed was a textbook example of small unit tactics that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. The assault began at dawn. Winters positioned a base of fire element to suppress the German positions, while he led an assault team across open ground. The plan required perfect timing and coordination. Too early, and his men would be cut down by German machine guns. Too late, and the supporting fire would lose effectiveness. Moving from position to position, the small American force systematically eliminated each gun emplacement. The Brecourt Manor assault is often cited as a classic example of small unit tactics and leadership in overcoming a larger enemy force. With just 13 men, Winters had neutralized a position held by 50 German soldiers, destroying 4 artillery pieces and capturing valuable intelligence. The action earned Winters the Distinguished Service Cross, but more importantly, it established his reputation as a leader who could think clearly under pressure and accomplish the impossible with limited resources. For the men of Easy Company, Brecourt Manor proved they could trust their lieutenant to bring them through anything. Following the success in Normandy, Easy Company found itself in the thick of the European campaign. As the Allies pushed across France, Winters was promoted to captain and given full command of the company. The transition felt natural to his men, who had long considered him their real leader. The fighting across France tested every lesson learned at Taucoa and refined in Normandy. Urban warfare, hedgerow fighting, and rapid advances each presented unique challenges. Winters adapted his tactics to each situation while maintaining his core principle: accomplish the mission with minimal casualties. His ability to read terrain and enemy positions seemed almost intuitive, though it was actually the result of careful study and preparation. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 brought Easy Company to Holland for what was supposed to be a quick victory. Instead, they found themselves in a prolonged and bloody campaign. The plan to capture key bridges and end the war by Christmas had gone badly wrong, leaving Allied forces scattered across the Dutch countryside. For 72 days, Easy Company held positions around Eindhoven and the Helles Highway corridor. The fighting was different from Normandy, less dramatic perhaps, but more wearing. Day after day of patrols, skirmishes, and the constant threat of German counterattacks took a toll on even the most experienced soldiers. It was during this period that Winters' leadership style fully matured. He recognized that maintaining morale was as important as tactical proficiency. He made sure his men received regular mail, decent food when possible, and brief respites from frontline duty. More importantly, he continued to share their risks, never asking his soldiers to do something he wouldn't do himself. The relationship between Winters and his men deepened during these months in Holland. They had seen him in action, watched him make life and death decisions under pressure, and witnessed his unwavering commitment to their welfare. In return, they gave him something beyond military obedience. They gave him trust. The winter of 1944 brought Easy Company to the Ardennes forest in Belgium, where they were supposed to enjoy a quiet period of rest and refitting. Instead, they found themselves in the path of Hitler's last great offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. On December 16th, German forces launched a massive surprise attack that caught Allied commanders completely off guard. Easy Company, now part of the 101st Airborne Division, was rushed to the besieged town of Bastogne. The situation was desperate. German forces had surrounded the town, cutting off supply lines and trapping American defenders in what seemed like an impossible position. The weather was brutal, with temperatures dropping well below freezing and snow making movement treacherous. Winters, now promoted to major and commanding the entire 2nd Battalion, faced the greatest challenge of his military career. His men were outnumbered, undersupplied, and facing an enemy determined to break through at any cost. Medical supplies were running low, ammunition was precious, and warm clothing was scarce. The siege of Bastogne tested every leadership principle Winters had developed. With conventional supply lines cut, he had to be creative about keeping his men fed and equipped. When artillery shells were in short supply, he insisted on accurate fire rather than volume. When medical evacuation was impossible, he ensured wounded soldiers received the best possible care in makeshift aid stations. But perhaps most importantly, Winters understood the psychological dimension of the battle. His men were scared, cold, and far from home during the Christmas season. Morale could collapse as quickly as defensive positions. He made a point of visiting each company position, talking with soldiers, and maintaining the calm confidence that had become his trademark. The breakthrough came after Christmas, when General Patton's Third Army smashed through German lines and relieved Bastogne. But the victory belonged as much to the defenders who had held the line as to the relieving forces. Easy Company had faced the best the German army could throw at them and emerged victorious. For Winters personally, Bastogne represented a turning point. He had proven himself capable of commanding not just a company, but an entire battalion under the most extreme conditions. His superiors took notice, and his men's confidence in him became unshakable. The final months of the European War brought Easy Company deep into Germany itself. By spring 1945, German resistance was crumbling, but pockets of fierce fighting remained. Winters, now a seasoned battalion commander, led his men through the industrial Ruhr region and into Bavaria. The advance through Germany was unlike anything they had experienced before. Towns surrendered without a fight. German soldiers gave up by the thousands, and civilians seemed more relieved than hostile. After years of brutal warfare, the approaching end felt almost surreal. The symbolic climax came in early May, when Easy Company was assigned to capture Hitler's mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. The Eagle's Nest, perched high in the Bavarian Alps, represented the heart of Nazi power. For soldiers who had fought their way across Europe, the opportunity to seize Hitler's personal sanctuary held deep meaning. The advance to Berchtesgaden was more of a race than a battle. Allied units competed to reach the symbolic prize first, but Easy Company was among the first to enter the complex. The irony wasn't lost on Winters. Farm boys from Pennsylvania and factory workers from cities across America were now occupying the retreats of Nazi leaders. Walking through Hitler's private quarters, Winters reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the fields of Pennsylvania to the mountains of Bavaria, he had traveled further than he ever imagined. The quiet young man who had enlisted to do his duty had become one of the most respected combat leaders in the American Army. But for Winters, the real victory wasn't the capture of symbolic targets. It was the knowledge that he had brought his men through the war with their humanity intact. They had faced the worst humanity could produce and responded with courage, professionalism, and decency. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. For Easy Company, it marked the end of an extraordinary journey that had taken them from the training fields of Georgia to the heart of Nazi Germany. They had become more than soldiers. They had become legends. Victory in Europe brought new challenges for the combat veterans of Easy Company. While some chose to remain in the military, Winters made a decision that surprised many of his colleagues. He would return to civilian life as quickly as possible. The warrior who had led men through some of the war's bloodiest battles wanted nothing more than peace and anonymity. The transition wasn't easy. After years of making life and death decisions under pressure, civilian concerns seemed trivial by comparison. How do you readjust to a world where the biggest crisis might be a business meeting or a family disagreement? Many veterans struggled with this transition, but Winters approached it with the same methodical planning he had applied to military operations. He accepted a position with Nixon Nitration Works in New Jersey, a company owned by the family of his wartime friend, Lewis Nixon. The work was respectable and allowed him to apply his organizational skills in a peacetime environment. More importantly, it provided the quiet, structured life he had dreamed of during those dark nights in the Ardennes. Winters deliberately avoided the spotlight that his wartime service might have provided. While other veterans wrote memoirs or pursued political careers, he focused on building a simple, productive civilian life. He married Ethel Estopi in 1948 and eventually settled on a small farm in Pennsylvania, not far from where he had grown up. The man who had commanded hundreds of soldiers in battle was content to manage a much smaller domain. He raised livestock, tended crops, and enjoyed the seasonal rhythms of agricultural life. Neighbors knew him as a quiet, reliable man who rarely talked about his war experiences. Most had no idea they were living near one of America's most decorated combat veterans. This choice of anonymity was deliberate and revealing. Winters had seen enough of war to know its true cost. He had no desire to romanticize or profit from experiences that had cost so many lives. Instead, he embodied the ideal of the citizen soldier, someone who serves when called upon, then returns to civilian life without seeking glory or reward. For decades, Richard Winters' story remained known only to his fellow veterans and military historians. Then, in 1992, historian Stephen Ambrose published Band of Brothers, a book that would transform Winters from a footnote in military history into a household name. Ambrose had spent years interviewing Easy Company veterans, piecing together their story from personal accounts, military records, and surviving documents. What emerged was a narrative that went beyond tactical analysis to explore the human dimension of combat leadership. Winters became the central figure not because he sought attention, but because his men consistently identified him as the leader who had made the difference. The book's success surprised everyone, including Winters himself. Readers were drawn to the story of ordinary Americans who had accomplished extraordinary things under pressure. But they were particularly fascinated by Winters's leadership style, quiet, competent, and focused on taking care of his people rather than advancing his own career. When HBO announced plans to adapt the book into a television miniseries, Winters was initially reluctant to cooperate. He had spent decades avoiding publicity and wasn't comfortable with the idea of actors portraying his most difficult moments. However, he eventually agreed to serve as a consultant, believing the story could honor the memory of soldiers who hadn't returned home. The 2001 broadcast of Band of Brothers brought Winters' story to millions of viewers worldwide. Actor Damian Lewis portrayed him with a quiet intensity that captured both his tactical brilliance and his genuine humanity. The series didn't glorify war, but it did celebrate the qualities that enable ordinary people to perform extraordinary acts of courage and leadership. Suddenly, the 73-year-old retired farmer found himself a celebrity. Letters poured in from viewers inspired by his example. Military officers studied his tactics and leadership methods. Business schools used his story to teach principles of management under pressure. Behind the public image of the perfect officer lay a more complex human being. Winters himself was often uncomfortable with the hero worship that followed the success of Band of Brothers. In private conversations with close friends, he admitted to moments of doubt and fear that never appeared in official accounts. The burden of command had taken a deeper toll than most people realized. Making decisions that determined whether men lived or died created a weight that never fully lifted. Winters carried the names and faces of every soldier lost under his command, questioning whether different choices might have saved lives. His relationship with fellow veterans was complicated by the passage of time and the distortions of memory. Some embraced the celebrity that came with the HBO series, while others resented the attention. Winters found himself mediating between competing versions of events, trying to preserve both historical accuracy and personal relationships. Letters from the families of men who had served under him revealed the lasting impact of his leadership style. Decades after the war, former soldiers still spoke of feeling protected by his competence and care. Mothers and wives thanked him for bringing their sons and husbands home alive. These private acknowledgments meant more to him than any official recognition. Perhaps most revealing was his continued study of military history and tactics long after his combat days ended. His personal library contained hundreds of books on warfare, leadership, and strategy. He never stopped analyzing what had worked and what might have been done better. For Winters, the war had ended, but the learning continued. His marriage to Ethel provided the stable foundation he had craved during his combat years. She understood his need for privacy and protected him from unwanted attention while supporting his efforts to preserve the historical record. Their partnership demonstrated that the same qualities that made him an effective combat leader, loyalty, reliability, and genuine care for others, also made him a devoted husband. The success of Band of Brothers inevitably led to embellishment and mythologizing of Easy Company's story. Veterans found themselves dealing with fans who had confused dramatic television with historical reality. Some accounts grew in the telling, while others were simplified for dramatic effect. One persistent myth suggested that Easy Company had been uniquely elite even within the airborne divisions. In reality, their effectiveness came not from superior selection or training, but from the leadership and unit cohesion they developed over time. Other companies in the 506th Regiment performed equally well under similar circumstances. Disagreements emerged among veterans about specific details of various engagements. After 60 years, memories had inevitably shifted, and different perspectives on the same events sometimes conflicted. Winters found himself in the delicate position of trying to maintain historical accuracy while preserving friendships. Some veterans felt uncomfortable with how their personal struggles had been portrayed or omitted from the popular narrative. Combat trauma, disciplinary problems, and personality conflicts didn't fit the heroic narrative, but were part of the real human story. Winters acknowledged these complexities while protecting the privacy of men who couldn't speak for themselves. The legend also attracted attention from people with questionable motives. Fake memorabilia appeared at auctions, and individuals falsely claimed connections to Easy Company. Winters worked with legitimate historians and museums to combat these fraudulent claims while supporting authentic efforts to preserve the historical record. Perhaps most challenging was the expectation that he should embody the perfect leader portrayed in popular media. Fans wanted to meet the character from the television series, not the real person with normal human flaws and limitations. Winters handled this with characteristic grace, always redirecting attention from his personal story to the broader lessons about leadership and sacrifice. The story of Richard Winters and Easy Company has influenced military training and leadership development far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Military academies around the world now study the Brécourt Manor assault as a textbook example of small unit tactics and adaptive leadership. Business schools have incorporated Winters' leadership principles into their curricula, recognizing that his methods for building trust and achieving objectives under pressure apply beyond military contexts. The concepts of leading by example, taking care of subordinates, and maintaining high standards while showing genuine concern for people resonate across many fields. The cultural impact extends to how Americans think about World War II and military service generally. Rather than focusing on technology or grand strategy, the Easy Company story emphasizes the human elements of warfare: leadership, loyalty, and sacrifice. This has helped bridge the gap between military and civilian understanding of what service really means. International audiences have also embraced the story, seeing in it universal themes about courage, leadership, and moral responsibility. The series has been translated into dozens of languages and shown worldwide, spreading awareness of both the specific historical events and the broader principles they represent. For current military leaders, Winters' example provides a model of ethical command that goes beyond technical competence. His insistence on sharing risks with subordinates, taking responsibility for failures while giving credit for successes, and maintaining humanity in an inhumane environment, offers guidance for modern commanders facing different but equally challenging situations. The popularity of the Easy Company story has also contributed to a broader appreciation for World War II veterans generally. Many families have been inspired to research their own military histories, leading to a renewed interest in preserving veteran accounts before that generation is lost forever. Richard Winters passed away on January 2, 2011, just 3 weeks before his 93rd birthday. His death marked the end of an era as the World War II generation continued to diminish. But his influence on ideas about leadership and service continues to grow. The funeral service reflected the man himself, simple, dignified, and focused on substance rather than ceremony. Fellow veterans, family members, and friends gathered to honor someone who had consistently put others before himself. Military honors acknowledged his service, but the personal tributes revealed his lasting impact on individual lives. Multiple memorials and educational programs now preserve his legacy. The Richard Winters Leadership Monument stands in Normandy, near the site of the Brécourt Manor assault. Museums display artifacts from his service, and educational programs use his story to teach leadership principles to new generations. Perhaps most importantly, his example continues to influence how we think about leadership in challenging times. His quiet competence, genuine concern for others, and refusal to seek personal glory provide a model that transcends military service. In an age of celebrity and self-promotion, Winters represents the power of humility and dedication to duty. The continuing popularity of Band of Brothers ensures that new audiences discover his story regularly. Social media groups dedicated to preserving his memory connect people from around the world who have been inspired by his example. Military veterans, business leaders, teachers, and ordinary citizens find in his story principles they can apply to their own challenges. The farm in Pennsylvania, where he spent his final years, has become a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand the man behind the legend. Visitors find not monuments or museums, but the simple landscape that provided him with the peace he sought after years of war. It serves as a reminder that true heroes often prefer quiet lives to public acclaim. As we face contemporary challenges that require courage, integrity, and effective leadership, Richard Winters' example remains remarkably relevant. He demonstrated that leadership isn't about commanding attention, but about earning trust. He showed that genuine strength comes not from dominating others, but from serving them. Most importantly, he proved that ordinary people, guided by clear principles and genuine concern for others, can accomplish extraordinary things. The bonds forged in combat proved stronger than time itself. For more than 6 decades after the war ended, Richard Winters maintained correspondence with the men who had served under his command. These letters, preserved in archives and family collections, reveal a side of the legendary officer that few outsiders ever saw. The correspondence began during the war itself, as Winters wrote to families of wounded or killed soldiers, offering comfort and sharing memories of their sons or husbands. These letters, written in the quiet moments between battles, showed his deep personal investment in every man under his command. He remembered birthdays, family circumstances, and personal dreams that soldiers had shared during long nights in foxholes. After the war, the letters took on a different character. Veterans scattered across America, pursuing careers, raising families, and trying to build normal lives after extraordinary experiences. But the connection remained. Winters became the unofficial keeper of Easy Company's collective memory, maintaining contact with men from sergeants to privates. The annual reunions that began in the 1970s became centerpieces of these ongoing relationships. Winters initially avoided these gatherings, focusing on his civilian life, but by 1980, he began attending regularly. These reunions were more than social events. They were opportunities to process shared trauma, celebrate survival, and maintain the brotherhood that had sustained them through combat. The letters reveal Winters' continuing concern for his men's welfare decades after the war. He helped veterans navigate bureaucratic challenges with the Veterans Administration, wrote recommendations for jobs, and provided emotional support during difficult periods. Former privates felt comfortable sharing personal struggles with their old commander, knowing he would respond with practical help and genuine compassion. Perhaps most touching were the letters from families thanking him for his wartime leadership. Wives credited him with bringing their husbands home alive, children wrote to express gratitude for their father's survival. These personal acknowledgments meant more to Winters than any official decoration, confirming that his focus on taking care of his men had lasting impact. The correspondence also served as historical documentation. When Stephen Ambrose began researching Band of Brothers, he found that Winters had maintained the most complete records of Easy Company's experiences. Letters between veterans helped establish chronologies, verify details, and preserve stories that might otherwise have been lost. Richard Winters distilled his leadership experience into 10 fundamental principles that he called leadership at the point of the bayonet. These weren't abstract theories developed in peacetime, but practical lessons learned under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The first principle, strive to be a leader of character, competence, and courage, reflected his belief that leadership was earned, not granted. Character meant doing the right thing even when no one was watching. Competence required continuous learning and preparation. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Lead from the front was more than a slogan for Winters. It was a daily practice. He never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. During patrols, he was often the first to cross dangerous ground. In defensive positions, he shared the risks of frontline observation posts. This physical courage earned moral authority that no rank insignia could provide. Physical fitness formed the foundation of his leadership philosophy. Stay in top physical shape. Physical stamina is the root of mental toughness, he emphasized. Combat demanded not just courage, but endurance. Leaders who couldn't keep up with their men physically couldn't maintain credibility under pressure. His emphasis on knowing his team went beyond names and numbers. Winters understood each soldier's background, motivations, and capabilities. This knowledge allowed him to assign tasks effectively and provide appropriate support during difficult periods. More importantly, it showed his men that he saw them as individuals, not just military resources. The principle of sharing hardships and dangers resonated throughout his command style. An officer should never put himself in a position where he takes anything from the men, he believed. While regulations might have entitled him to better food, shelter, or equipment, he consistently chose to share whatever conditions his soldiers endured. Perhaps most importantly, Winters understood that leadership was fundamentally about serving others. His job wasn't to advance his own career, but to accomplish missions while preserving the lives and welfare of his men. This servant leadership philosophy created loyalty that extended far beyond military service. These principles weren't developed in isolation. Winters studied military history extensively, learning from both successful and failed leaders throughout history. He adapted classical principles of command to modern warfare, creating a leadership style that was both timeless and contemporary. The effectiveness of his approach was measured not just in tactical success, but in the long-term welfare of his men. Easy Company suffered fewer casualties than comparable units, completed more difficult missions, and maintained higher morale throughout the war. These results validated his conviction that taking care of soldiers was the best way to achieve military objectives. Military academies around the world now study Winters' leadership methods as examples of effective small unit command. His principles have been incorporated into officer training programs, leadership courses, and military doctrine development. The Brecourt Manor Assault is taught as a case study in tactical leadership at West Point Sandhurst and other prestigious military institutions. Contemporary military leaders cite Winters as a formative influence on their own command philosophies. General Stanley McChrystal, who led Special Operations Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, has referenced Winter's emphasis on building trust and sharing risks with subordinates. Admiral William McRaven, architect of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, has praised Winter's focus on preparation and attention to detail. The principles Winters developed during World War II have proven remarkably adaptable to modern warfare. His emphasis on decentralized decision-making anticipated the need for junior leaders to operate independently in complex environments. His focus on unit cohesion addressed challenges that remain relevant in contemporary military operations. Military psychologists have studied Winter's methods for building resilience in combat units. His approach to mental preparation, stress management, and maintaining unit morale under extreme conditions provides insights for modern leaders dealing with post-traumatic stress and combat fatigue. The emphasis on personal relationships and mutual support within units has influenced current approaches to military mental health. Special operations units have particularly embraced Winter's leadership model. The emphasis on small, highly trained teams operating independently aligns with modern special forces doctrine. His methods for building trust, maintaining standards, and accomplishing difficult missions with limited resources remain highly relevant. International military leaders have also studied his example. British, Canadian, Australian, and other allied officers have incorporated his principles into their own training programs. The universal appeal of his leadership style transcends national military traditions and cultural differences. Perhaps most significantly, Winter's example has influenced how military institutions think about developing leaders. Rather than focusing solely on technical skills or theoretical knowledge, modern military education increasingly emphasizes character development, ethical decision-making, and servant leadership, concepts that were central to Winters's approach. Richard Winters's story resonates across cultural and national boundaries, offering universal lessons about leadership, courage, and human dignity. International audiences have embraced his example, finding in it principles that transcend American military culture. In Europe, where many of his most famous actions took place, Winters is remembered not just as an American hero, but as a liberator whose actions helped restore freedom to occupied territories. The monument dedicated to him near Utah Beach in Normandy attracts visitors from around the world. French, British, Dutch, and German visitors study his story as part of their own historical understanding of World War II. European military historians have analyzed his tactics and leadership methods, often comparing them to their own national military traditions. His emphasis on individual initiative and decentralized command resonated particularly well with British military culture, while his systematic approach to training and preparation aligned with German military thinking. In Asia, where concepts of leadership often emphasize collective harmony and respect for authority, Winters's servant leadership philosophy has found unexpected appreciation. Japanese business schools have studied his methods for building team cohesion and maintaining high performance under pressure. His emphasis on personal example rather than positional authority appeals to cultures that value demonstrated competence. Military institutions in developing nations have found his principles particularly relevant. His focus on maximizing effectiveness with limited resources, building unit cohesion in diverse groups, and maintaining high standards without expensive equipment addresses challenges that many smaller militaries face regularly. The international success of Band of Brothers introduced Winter's story to audiences who might never have encountered American military history otherwise. Translations into dozens of languages have spread awareness of his leadership principles across diverse cultures and societies. Academic institutions worldwide have incorporated his story into leadership and management curricula. Business schools in Europe, Asia, and Latin America use his example to teach principles of crisis leadership, team building, and ethical decision-making under pressure. What distinguished Richard Winters from other successful military leaders of his era? While the Second World War produced many capable commanders, Winters represented a unique combination of tactical brilliance, personal humility, and genuine care for subordinates that set him apart from his contemporaries. Unlike flamboyant leaders such as General George Patton, who inspired through dramatic speeches and bold gestures, Winters led through quiet competence and personal example. Where Patton demanded attention and cultivated a larger-than-life persona, Winters preferred to remain in the background, allowing his actions to speak for themselves. Compared to methodical commanders like General Omar Bradley, Winters shared an emphasis on careful planning and attention to detail. However, his small unit perspective gave him insights into individual soldier welfare that higher-level commanders might overlook. His approach combined Bradley's systematic thinking with intimate knowledge of his men's capabilities and limitations. The contrast with his immediate superior, Colonel Robert Sink, revealed different approaches to leadership within the same organization. Sink was an effective regimental commander who understood large unit operations, but Winters' company and battalion-level leadership demonstrated how strategic objectives could be achieved through tactical excellence and inspired small unit performance. Contemporary British leaders like Major John Howard, who led the glider assault on Pegasus Bridge, shared Winters' emphasis on thorough preparation and personal leadership. However, Winters' extended combat service over multiple campaigns demonstrated sustained excellence under varying conditions that few officers of any nationality matched. German officers such as Colonel Friedrich von der Heydte, who commanded German paratroopers, possessed technical competence comparable to Winters. However, the Nazi system's emphasis on ideology over individual welfare created leadership challenges that Winters never faced. His ability to maintain unit cohesion through genuine care, rather than institutional coercion, represented a fundamental philosophical difference. Soviet officers operating under similar small unit conditions faced different pressures entirely. Political oversight and brutal disciplinary systems created leadership environments that made Winters' collaborative approach nearly impossible. His success demonstrated the effectiveness of leadership based on trust and competence rather than fear and control. What made Winters unique wasn't any single quality, but the combination of tactical brilliance, personal integrity, and genuine concern for others. While many officers possessed one or two of these characteristics, few combined all three so effectively over such an extended period of combat service. The cultural impact of Richard Winters' story extends far beyond military history into broader popular culture. His example has influenced films, television, literature, video games, and digital media in ways that continue to shape how contemporary audiences understand leadership and heroism. Following the success of Band of Brothers, numerous documentaries have explored his leadership methods and wartime experiences. The History Channel, Discovery, and other networks have produced programs analyzing his tactics and interviewing surviving veterans who served under his command. These productions have introduced his story to audiences who might never read military history books. His influence on military fiction has been substantial. Authors writing about warfare increasingly portray officers who embody his leadership principles: quiet competence, genuine concern for subordinates, and effectiveness without self-promotion. This has created a new archetype in war literature that contrasts sharply with earlier traditions of heroic military fiction. Video game developers have incorporated elements of his story and leadership style into military-themed games. Rather than focusing solely on combat action, newer games emphasize tactical decision-making, unit management, and the consequences of leadership choices, themes directly influenced by analysis of Winter's methods. The business world has embraced his story as a source of leadership instruction. Corporate training programs, management seminars, and executive education courses regularly use his example to teach principles of crisis leadership, team building, and ethical decision-making. His methods have been adapted for civilian contexts, from hospital emergency rooms to corporate boardrooms. Educational institutions have integrated his story into curricula beyond military history. Schools teaching leadership, management, ethics, and organizational behavior use his example to illustrate practical applications of theoretical concepts. Students who might never study military history encounter his principles through business or leadership courses. Social media has created new venues for discussing and preserving his legacy. Facebook groups, YouTube channels, and specialized forums allow military history enthusiasts to share information, debate historical details, and connect with others interested in his story. These digital communities have become repositories of information that extend beyond traditional academic sources. The continuing popularity of World War II content across all media platforms ensures that his story reaches new generations regularly. Whether through streaming services, podcasts, or digital publications, contemporary audiences continue discovering his example and finding relevance in principles developed during a very different era. The internet age has created unprecedented opportunities for preserving and sharing Richard Winters' legacy. Online communities dedicated to his memory and the broader story of Easy Company have become repositories of information, analysis, and personal connection that extend far beyond traditional historical preservation. Specialized websites maintain comprehensive databases of Easy Company veterans, tracking their post-war lives, preserving photographs, and documenting their stories. These digital archives often contain information unavailable in official sources, including personal anecdotes, family histories, and details about veterans' civilian careers. YouTube channels devoted to military history regularly feature content about Winters and Easy Company. Some focus on tactical analysis of famous battles, while others explore lesser-known aspects of their story. These productions have introduced his example to international audiences and younger generations, who might not encounter his story through traditional media. Social media groups provide platforms for family members of Easy Company veterans to share memories, photographs, and artifacts. Children and grandchildren of men who served under Winters contribute personal stories that humanize the historical narrative and provide insights into the long-term impact of his leadership. Online forums dedicated to World War II history feature regular discussions about Winters' tactics, leadership methods, and historical significance. Military professionals, historians, and enthusiasts debate specific details of famous engagements while analyzing broader implications of his approach to command. Wikipedia and other collaborative platforms have created comprehensive resources about his life and service. These articles, maintained by volunteers worldwide, provide accessible introductions to his story while linking to more specialized sources for detailed research. Digital preservation efforts have made previously unavailable materials accessible to researchers and enthusiasts. Scanned letters, photographs, military records, and personal documents are now available online, allowing detailed study of aspects of his service that were once available only to specialized researchers. Virtual reality and interactive media are beginning to incorporate his story into immersive experiences. These technologies allow users to explore historical locations, experience tactical scenarios, and gain deeper understanding of the challenges he faced and the decisions he made. Gaming communities have created modifications and custom scenarios based on his famous engagements. These interactive experiences, while entertainment-focused, often require players to understand and apply his tactical principles, creating engagement with his methods that traditional media cannot provide. The global reach of digital media has made his story accessible to audiences in countries and languages far removed from its original American context. Translations, subtitled videos, and international discussions have created a worldwide community of people inspired by his example and interested in applying his principles to contemporary challenges. The boy from Pennsylvania, who wanted nothing more than a quiet plot of land, achieved something greater than personal peace. He showed us what authentic leadership looks like. In a world that often seems to reward the loudest voices and the biggest personalities, Richard Winters reminds us that the most effective leaders are often the quietest ones. Those who lead not through words, but through example. Not through force, but through competence. Not through self-promotion, but through selfless service to others. His story endures because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature. The desire to be part of something larger than ourselves, to follow leaders we can trust, and to believe that individual character can make a difference in the world. Richard Winters proved that it can, and his example continues to inspire new generations of leaders who understand that the greatest victories are won not for personal glory, but in service to something greater than themselves.